Hello, hello, hello. How's everyone doing today?
All right, how about you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
I am good, thank you.
Good, good. Oh. I'm moving to make you guys all co-hosts, and give me just a second.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hey, Rhonda.
Hi. Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you. I'm going to play the slideshow.
Perfect.
So I will share screen. And
Okay, Shirley, I thought I was just going to share it. Have you been sharing
okay.
it, or do you have?
No, go ahead. You share.
No, she has a different, so Shirley's showing the slideshow for Peak and like the sponsorship one, right? And then
Oh,
you guys will share your,
Yes.
like once it gets everyone stuck, then she'll take hers down and you can share your PowerPoint.
Okay.
gotcha.
So
Okay.
I'm okay. There, that should do. It's just the ad. Oh. But it's kind of a nice one too. It shows our sponsors.
Nice.
I know that you guys are doing a panel. So throughout your presentation, do you want people to ask questions and unmute themselves? Would you prefer them to keep it in the chat and then kind of just let you guys know, or is someone on the team going to monitor chat? Like, well, I just want to know what role you want me to play and how much you want me to be in or out.
Yeah, thanks, Sherelle. So we have a pretty tight presentation. So I think we'll do mostly question and answer at the end.
Okay.
We at one time are asking them to use the chat to introduce themselves, but not really sort of responding or engaging with that. And then we do have 2 polls, which we'll probably speak to, but again, questions and answers at the end, and we'll try and leave a good 10 minutes for that. But I think we're probably all feeling the pressure of like trying to keep our presentations to make it so we can get there.
Right.
So we're not really a panel, like everybody has their own section, so it flows nicely.
Okay.
But yeah, so the answer is questions at the end.
Okay, perfect.
And how would you like me to be the timekeeper? Do you want me to text or to just say it, or like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, things like that? Or put it in the chat?
What do you think? Casey is mostly towards the end, as well as Bob. I mean, it might be good to have a nice time check when we have about 15 minutes left, I would say. Or let's see, right before Casey and Bob, we would have hopefully about 20 minutes left. So that would be a good point, I think, when we have 20 minutes left. And you could just put it in the chat if everybody's going to watch that. Is that okay, Casey?
Yeah, that's great. So in the chat or whatever, and my 2 slides I think are the easiest to adjust with time, because I can get more detailed with the story, or I can shorten it and just provide in those essential details. So
Okay.
Okay.
Now, another thing to have some questions about or ask about. So Gail, you were going to launch both polls, so I just want to make sure that you're seeing them. And I think we had submitted both of our polls that we have to be translated into Spanish too. And I don't know if that happened, but then again, I don't even know how we would launch those, where those would be located.
I was told that they were, so if you just click on.
Oh,
I know-
actually, I see it. Yeah.
Okay.
It says Encuesta 1.
Perfect.
So I guess, Gail, when you launch poll 1, you also will want to go in and launch the other one in Spanish as well. You see that?
I do. I see that. I see
Okay.
the poll for both. I see both polls.
Okay. We have 2 other presenters, Sherelle. I know Courtney Callis, she's really not going to be able to get on till right at 2, so maybe just watch for that. If you, I mean, she doesn't need to be a co-host. I'm just going to share my screen. But and then the other one is Bob Barros, and I'm not sure. He'll probably be on soon, hopefully.
Okay, perfect. I'll look out for them.
I was going to ask, and it could be anybody, Casey or Rhonda, but around slide 12, when it's the slide of my age continuum, I'm going to say, you know, to visit the website, you know, 'cause that's truly where you can learn more. So it'd be great if somebody in the chat at that time could have the homepage of our Sequencing of Services website and throw that in the chat.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda.
Thanks, Rhonda. That'd be better.
That piece.
About 5 minutes out from our start time. Right. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in about 3 minutes. Bob has just joined. All right, I think Courtney's coming in. So you guys have everyone, I believe. And Shirley, if you want to stop the slideshow, we'll go ahead and get started. We're at the top of the hour. And Shirley, if you'll keep admitting people while I'm doing my little spiel in the beginning, that way everyone's coming in, I'd greatly appreciate that. All right, welcome, welcome. We're on our last session on our last day of the conference. Thank you guys so much for joining. My name is Sherelle Bethel. I am the RSA Power Transition Project Director. And we'll being joined by Shirley Swope, who is also a member of PEAK. She'll be our co-host today. So you are in session 19, titled Secondary Transition is a Continuum, Starting Early, presented by Sequencing of Services and Jennifer Stewart. You are all muted and questions can be entered into the chat box. If you have any technical issues, concerns, or questions, please let me know via the chat box, and welcome to our session. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenters today. Colorado state agencies, education partners, families, and service providers have collaborated to develop a shared vision and shared student outcomes for students with disabilities during their transition before and after high school. The vision of the Sequencing of Services framework is to demonstrate what programming and services across a continuum of ages are available to students and how different entities can all work together. This tool can be used to have local discussions and individual discussions. The Sequencing of Services framework emphasizes the importance of partnerships, high expectations around employment, and exposing students at an early age to the opportunities to move towards their post-secondary vision. Working more collaboratively builds a local roadmap for students, families, and professionals to navigate, utilize, and access the most appropriate resources. Jennifer, it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Sherelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for choosing our session. Secondary transition is a continuum, starting early, utilizing Colorado's Sequencing of Services framework as a guide. So my name is Jennifer Stewart. I'm the owner of Breaking Expectations, LLC, and I'm currently contracted to act as a project manager for our Sequencing of Services initiative here in Colorado, which I'm going to be speaking to. I'm also joined with a nice group of colleagues here that are going to take the time to introduce themselves when they come up in the presentation. So I'm going to move us forward and you'll get to know them in just a bit. So our goals for today, we're going to be talking to you about how transition needs to be a student-driven process, and that we really want to see that starting at these earlier ages to encourage these higher expectations. We're going to be talking about how high school is really a time of learning and assessing student growth and providing opportunities for students to prepare to achieve what we call the 6 core student outcomes, which come from our Sequencing of Services framework that I'm going to speak to in just a second here. And lastly, we're going to focus on the importance of collaboration and how that should really happen beyond the 4 classroom walls, right? And that's really essential to prepare our students to prepare for employment in adult life. Those are our goals for today. I'm going to start us off by doing just an overview of the project, how it sort of got started and what it looks like currently. And then we're going to talk about the connection to secondary transition, right? So what is secondary transition? What is a family's role in the process? How can transition assessments and services connect to the 6 core outcomes? And then we'll end with interagency collaboration and how that sort of brings the whole Sequencing of Services project to life. So at this time, I'm going to ask for you to use the chat. Just quickly, we'd love to get to know a little bit more who's in the room. So if you're a parent or professional, and then also the age of your child, or if you're working with students, sort of what age range that falls into, just so we have a better idea of who we're speaking to. So as you're filling out the chat, I am going to keep us moving and do the overview of the Sequencing of Services project. So our project really came together with sort of this question about how can we improve our systems for families and students, right? So an understanding that our secondary transition process, the time during the high school years, that expectation of what's going to happen after I leave the school system is a complicated time. So the question says, how can we improve our systems? We know we need to improve mapping out our resources, better understanding what's available in communities. We know we can improve systems of communication and referrals, getting connected to services. And ultimately, we need to improve information for families so they know what in fact is available. So fortunately, in 2019, a state level team came together and said, we must improve interagency collaboration, in recognizing that it takes a village, right? So we can't just look to our school systems to get this done. We can't just look to our families and our parents. We can't look to just some community agency to figure out secondary transition and supporting a student to achieve their post-secondary vision, right? It really needs to be an interagency effort. So what happened in 2019, we came together at the state level, right? And we started having conversations around interagency collaboration. And what we developed is the sequencing of services framework, which sort of consists of these 6 core outcomes that I'm going to talk about here in just a second. But what we've done since 2019 is we've moved into the community level. So this past school year, so starting in September, we've been working with 4 communities that are here with me today. So we've been working with Weld, Mesa, Denver, and Pueblo to help them to implement the sequencing of services framework that was created at the state level. So we've gone from state and we're in the community currently, and our vision is that we're really, in moving forward, going to be working with students to help them work through the 6 core outcomes and help them to support their post-secondary vision. So that sort of is our future vision, is getting down to that student level. So this slide represents who are these state level partners that came together in 2019. And again, I also want to emphasize that are still meeting today. We have a meeting next week. Right now, this state level team meets on a quarterly basis. But originally, when we first came together and the work was more intense, we were really trying to figure out what we were doing, so more on a monthly basis. Just want to point out, the Department of Education and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation were really our leading agencies that were first asking that question: how can we improve our system for families, right? So they were the leaders and drivers of uniting this team that was also facilitated by some national technical assistance partners that have still been involved in the work today. Also pointing out, Peak Parent has been a partner from the beginning, always making sure a staff member is present at the meetings and having that sort of family perspective, making sure the information and the strategies that we're putting out actually, in the end, will support families. So just a little shout out to Peak. So all these state partners came together a couple years ago, and we started to say, well, we need to create a vision statement for the work that we want to do together, right? So everybody was coming at their work a little bit differently, working with students, whether it would be from education standpoint, employment, around healthcare. And so we needed to come up with a shared vision statement. So what we came up with is each and every student, regardless of disability, has a right to transition to an adult life that includes education, employment, independent living, full community participation, and the right to make decisions in and about their lives. So from this state vision, our team really needed to say, well, what is the work that we want to do together, right? So we knew we needed to come up with a framework that had these key aspects. And so we wanted a framework that supported the idea that we need to have interagency partnerships happening at younger ages during high school, so that transition is not just about our 18 to 21, near exit, let's start partnering, right? But we wanted a framework that supported partnerships at younger ages. We wanted a framework that was about high expectations, right? So student outcomes, and in particular, employment. Everybody in some ways around the table for our state level was involved in supporting young adults with disabilities in some way prepare for employment. So that was a unifying factor. Also just pointing out, Colorado's an employment first state, right? So we have this sort of systemic philosophy that we believe we want our, each and every student to be out there competitively employed after they graduate. We wanted a framework that was about self-determination and having high expectations. We needed a framework that highlighted the importance of agency coordination and collaboration, right? So reducing our silos and ultimately creating more consistent language. So those were our goals in moving forward and creating this new shared framework. So what our state level team has put together is what we call our 6 core student outcomes. So in this graphic, you see the student and youth in the middle, surrounded by 6 core outcomes. So a nice comprehensive way to think about how we can support a student to achieve their post-secondary vision. Now, I want to highlight here that this is an interagency framework. So when we have 6 core outcomes, There is no intention that the school needs to do all of this alone, or that the family needs to do all of this alone. We have 6 core student outcomes, so we can bring our partners to the table and say, hey, who can support the student with this? Who can support the student with this, right? Let me just list these off real quick. So building self-determination and leadership skills, build skills to safely navigate the community and access services, understand post-secondary options, develop competence in computer and digital literacy, the expectation of competitive employment, and understanding disability and health management. So with these 6 core outcomes, what our framework does is we create this age continuum, right? So we have all the way from less than 14 up to ages 22 and 24. So for each 6 core outcome, we have this age continuum. And so one of the first things we say is, who around the table, so who are our partners in the community that can support students at these different ages to achieve those 6 core outcomes? And then once you have the partners mapped out, we say, what services and resources and trainings are available from these partners? So we understand that if we have a 14-year-old, the services around building self-determination skills are going to look different for somebody who's 19 to 21. And so that's why we have this age continuum broken down for the 6 core outcomes. So much more information about our framework and the details of it and how this all plays out on our website. My colleague Rhonda, I think she's going to throw the website into the chat if she hasn't already, so you can go there and find out more. So let me talk a little bit how this is operationalized, how we're moving this to the community level and what we're doing in our 4 pilot sites, right? So in Mesa, Weld, Pueblo, and Denver, these are sort of our key components to operationalize this, make this come to life. And so the first step is we need to build an interagency transition team. So I'll say, you know, in these communities, while maybe schools were working with different partners, but there wasn't maybe a regular meeting, regular communication, and an enhanced understanding of roles and responsibilities. So we're supporting them to build interagency transition teams, developing a shared understanding of transition services, having discussions around how are we collaborating with our families in our communities to have these conversations around transition. How are we talking about and preparing students for competitive integrated employment, right? So what are the services, programs, opportunities during the high school years to prepare them for competitive employment? And then in moving forward, we're really starting to talk about putting practices in place around shared communication to track student growth, right? This model is all about student progress and age continuum where we want to see them progressing, and also partnering. So we need good communication practices. And then lastly here, we're going to be working with our pilots to make sure, you know, things are student driven and that ultimately all the services we're providing for students reflect their vision for what it is that they want to do when they leave the school system. So with me today, we have Mesa, Denver, Weld, and Pueblo, and you're going to be hearing from them about the secondary transition process and how it sort of is connecting to sequencing of services. So what I'll want you to do is keep sequencing of services in mind as we're talking more about the secondary transition process. As you can see from this slide, our goal with our pilot sites is to support them to really become a sustainable interagency transition team. We want to see this in Colorado. We don't want to just see it in our 4 community pilots, but this is also a vision for Colorado. How can we get more communities supported, thinking about who are their partners around the table, what are the roles and responsibilities? Because the ultimate goal is to get students connected to more services, to have them supported around those 6 core outcomes. So today, and moving forward, again, keeping sequencing of services in your mind, we're going to move to helping you understand what is secondary transition and what you can expect from the school, helping you learn about the importance of the parent's role in this process, ensuring you become knowledgeable about assessments and services that connect to the 6 core outcomes, and then ending with just the importance of this interagency collaboration and how it can really help get students into the community and start working. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Gail Lott from the Department of Education, who is going to speak to what is secondary transition.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gail Lott. I am a consultant at the Department of Education. I work as a secondary transition specialist, and I have been there for a little over 6 years. So I'm going to talk to you today about transition. I am going to launch a poll just to see what your level of knowledge is about secondary transition planning. And I'll give you about a minute to complete the poll. Are you able to see the poll? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you about a minute to complete the poll. Knowledge of transition planning is kind of like taking a hike up the mountain. On your hike to gain knowledge about transition planning to support your team, where would you say you are? Where are you on this journey? I haven't even decided to go on a hike yet. I am at the trailhead of the hike, but I haven't moved forward. I have hiked a little, but feeling a little overwhelmed. I've hiked pretty far, and I'm at the tree line taking a rest. And the last choice, I have hiked to the summit of the mountain. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. It looks like the majority of folks are at, I have hiked a little, but feeling a little overwhelmed at what I will encounter. And then I have hiked pretty far and I'm at the tree line taking a rest. Okay, so we have some folks with a great deal of knowledge about secondary transition planning. I am just going to provide an overview and will not have time to go in depth about secondary transition planning. So thank you for participating in our poll today. Okay, secondary transition planning is really about beginning with the end in mind. Okay, beginning with the end in mind. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about beginning with the end in mind, we are really talking about this. Starting with a clear understanding of what your destination is, where you are going. It means to know where you are going so that you have a better understanding where you are now, and so that the steps are always in the right direction. And so really that's what secondary transition planning is about. Making sure we have a plan to take us in the right direction. Next slide, please. So secondary transition planning identifies and clarifies the destination, and it identifies and clarifies the steps that students and families need to take to reach the destination. Next slide, please. So the purpose of everything that we do, the purpose of special education is to provide a free and appropriate public education that emphasizes special education related services designed to meet a student's unique needs. And really that's why IDEA was developed, because students with disabilities were not experiencing successful outcomes. So we now have a plan for how to prepare our students for further education, employment, and independent living, which is why we are doing what we are doing. Next slide, please. So what I really like is that IDEA really provides a roadmap for us. We know what should be included in the secondary transition planning process as a result of what has been outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA says that transition planning should begin at age 16. But in Colorado, our Colorado state law says that transition planning should begin at age 15 and no later than the end of the 9th grade. So our high school IEPs are transition IEPs, and our transition IEPs should have these components. They should have appropriate measurable post-secondary goals. That's that ending destination that we are planning towards. That's that end point. We're beginning with the end in mind, and we are updating that plan every year. And our plan is based on age-appropriate transition assessments. And so you're going to find out later how each person on that team can be involved in that age-appropriate transition process. There are transition services that occur that help those students to meet those post-secondary goals. And so what are some of those services that might happen as a result? So that those transition services could include instruction. It could include services provided by related service providers like OT, occupational therapists, physical therapists. It could be any type of community experience that a student might have. It could be those at the acquisition of daily living skills. What kind of daily living skills does that student need instruction in? Does that student need a functional vocational assessment? And so the transition services and includes courses of study. So what are the courses that the student needs to be enrolled in that will enable them to meet their post-secondary goal? And those annual goals that need to be developed that are related to those transition services that really work on the skills that need to be developed by that student to meet their post-secondary goal. The other part of that is there evidence that the student was invited to the IEP team meeting where transition services are discussed? And is there evidence, if appropriate, that an agency, a representative from any participating agency was invited to the IEP team meeting with the prior consent of the parent or the student who has reached age of majority? So this is our roadmap. These are the elements of secondary transition. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about what some of those transition services could be for a student. They are individually designed based on the student's needs. And really, those services are designed to help that student transition from school life to post-school life. And so we really want our students to be able to successfully transition to post-secondary education, integrated employment, continuing in adult education, adult services, be able to live independently and participate fully in their community or to the greatest extent possible. So that is why that is our goal: successful transition, successful outcomes. Next slide, please. So when we talk about transition services, we're talking about this whole process is driven by a comprehensive age-appropriate transition assessment process. And within that process, we are trying to identify a student's strengths, interests, preferences, and needs. It is this information that guides the design of the plan for each and every student. And based on the information that we find, we identify what those post-school goals are, that destination. And so when writing transition plans, there are two areas where post-school goals are required, and that is in the area of education and training, and the other area is career and employment. All students with disabilities, all students with IEPs are required to have post-secondary goals in these areas. Students will have measurable independent living goals only as transition assessment indicates there is a need for it. So after those post-school goals are developed, then we're going to write those measurable annual goals. These measurable annual goals will address the skills that are needed for the students to meet their post-school goals. We're going to write a course of study. We're going to talk about the courses that the students need to be enrolled in to meet their post-school goals. And we're going to identify those transition services and how the adults in their community are going to support them. How are the general ed teachers going to support them? How are the special education teachers? How are those agencies going to support them and provide them the instruction, the related services, the community experiences, and independent living support that they need? And then we're going to coordinate. We're coordinating with these outside agencies, which is where the sequencing of services piece is really important. They are going to help support, come alongside educators to support the needs of students. Next slide, please. So who is involved in secondary transition planning? So at the center of all of this is all about the student and how we are going to provide that student with what they need in order to be successful. So we have the school team, who is a part of this secondary transition planning process, the special ed teacher, the school counselor, the gen ed teacher. So any other support within that school system that the team deems is necessary. Maybe it's the school principal, maybe it's the coach, whoever else was within that school system that will support that student. And then if there's a transition specialist or a transition coordinator there, including that transition coordinator in that discussion. The other important part of this team is the family. And so family engagement, family involvement, family input into the secondary transition planning process is critical and important. And anybody else that the family deems is important should be a part of this meeting. And then we have this whole community of professionals, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. It could be the Community-Centered Board. It could be any other adult agency provider that might be able to provide services to that student. These are the individuals that might be involved in this whole secondary transition planning process. Next slide, please. So Rhonda is going to talk about the family's role in secondary transition planning. Rhonda.
Thank you, Gail. My name is Rhonda Berry, and I'm with the Archipelago. I've been there about almost 10 years now. So my goal today is to talk to you, as Gail mentioned, the family's role in secondary transition. And I know all the information we've seen so far is a little overwhelming, or can appear to be a little overwhelming, but I'll give you some examples of how you can make it work. Next slide. I just love this visual. If you think about transition services, this is something that you've been doing as a parent or a professional really since the first moment that your child either entered early intervention or school or something like that. Along your journey, you've run into many obstacles. There's been people who have helped you along the way. There have been people who taught you what not to do along the way, but it's just been a continuous climb as you transition from early intervention to kindergarten, kindergarten to elementary, elementary to middle, and then of course, high school. And a lot of the parents I work with tell me they're always just looking for high school graduation, finishing high school, and then they are victorious. But we're here today to talk about the next steps. Next slide. And the parents I work with often tell me that once they get out of high school and they're looking or facing this transition planning, they really feel like they've kind of fallen off of a cliff. They've had all of these services and supports and people to help along the way. But once you start to see that 18 to 21 year timeframe kind of off in the horizon, it feels a lot like people drop off. Well, we're here to kind of tell you that there is no secret roadmap or a secret password or anything like that to get into transition services. It's just good to think of all the people who have helped you along the way and how you can make that, use those people to go forward and then as well help others. Next screen. So Gail, in her presentation, she brought up these three circles that make kind of a triangle of transition services. And you'll see the K-12 education, the community agency and services, and family members. As your child gets more into transition age, that K-12 education bubble kind of fades back into the background. And the community agency and services and family members sort of step forward. Go ahead. I put together this slide just based on talking to parents and families and special education teachers that I've worked with over the years about the transition process. I put out a poll and asked them what was their best advice for parents. And what I heard overwhelmingly was start early and don't stop. So I saw in the poll, we have a lot of kids who are very young, and then we have some that are older. So it's a great time to get in on this and start planning. Some of the other tips they provided were identify the strength and interest of your children. Implement the interest in the IEPs, and I'm going to show you on the next slides how that can be done. Involve your student. Of course, there's nothing for us without us, right? Know your options. This is probably my favorite one. Ask ask again, and then follow up. Never take no as an answer. Continue to build that community that we talked about in the first slide, all those people who helped you get to that role in your journey. When you get it figured out, help others. And when you don't get it figured out or you find you did something wrong, share that as well so you can help others. Okay, next slide. So I thought the best way to demonstrate this, as you look at all of the slides we presented so far and just the transition process in general, it does seem a little overwhelming. And as Jennifer mentioned in her portion of the presentation, we're working with this group to create a work group to help parents navigate. But I thought the best way to do that today was to give you an example. So this is a true story. I have a permission from the parent to share this, and this is how she handled transition services for her student. So this is Jarek when he was younger, and Jarek has autism. And when he was in elementary school, he really was suffering from a lot of sensory overload. The class was too loud, it was too bright, the kid next to him smelled too bad. I mean, he just continued to have sensory issues. So Jarek spent a lot of the first part of that year either under his teacher's desk, under his own desk, or taking out entire row of desks and having to clear a room just because he was so overloaded. Well, at the time, everybody was just at a loss what to do with Jarek. And we had just a phenomenal principal who said, give me one thing that Jarek cares about. And after a long thought, the parent said, the only thing he cares about is fishing. So this principal said, well, let's figure out how to make that work. So right from the beginning, she included his love of fishing into his IMP, and she created like a reinforcement structure for him based on fishing. And at first it was just really little things, like if he came out from under the desk, he would get to choose a fly from a tackle box. And then sometimes he could earn bait, and then they worked in conjunction with the family and would take him on fishing trips, depending on how much further he had gotten progressed through the day. And with his fishing, he really created this group, and these are all stories or pictures from the parent directly. He created his own little community of kids who were also interested in fishing. So that allowed him to have that connection piece that he was sort of missing in the classroom. Next slide, please. So you may be asking, how does the love of fishing have anything to do with the transition services and this reinforcement structure in elementary school? But what this team did as a whole is they kept fishing as his primary interest in his plan and kept moving forward with that. And when we were in 8th grade, we were in the transition meeting, the high school people come over and talk about all the great things at their high school. They were going down the list of clubs and athletics and all the things that Jarek could join. And at one point they said cyclone anglers. And Jarek was in this meeting with me, and he had his head down on the desk and his head was kind of face down. And you saw him look up when he heard this, the cyclone anglers. And that was the first time in the meeting he had actually spoke out and said, well, what is this about? And they explained to them that that is an actual fishing club. It's a school sponsored, it's considered a sport. It's the Angler Federation, and they actually go out and fish. And so he said, well, I want to do that. And you kind of saw that moment where everybody looked around the table like, well, we've never done this before. But again, tying back to that advice from parents, we had a parent who didn't take no as an answer. So instantly she was like, well, what do we need to do to make this happen? And the school said, well, we've never had a kid with autism in this club. You know, it's out in the middle of the lake. What if there's an issue? What if we don't know what to do? And the parent and Jarek and the team really just said, no, that's not an answer. We'll figure it out. And so they met with the coach and they did some small steps, but he joined this Angler Federation called the Cyclone Anglers. And the picture in the middle here is him in his like team uniform, because they actually have real competition. Who knew? I didn't know until this. But so they use this fishing in there. Well, with the fishing club, Jarek was in, of course, you know, general education, and he had friends from the Cyclone Anglers. So he created even a deeper sense of community. Now he belonged to the high school, and he was doing things that interest him and that were important to him, and it all helped. So the picture over here on the left is Jarek at his high school graduation. Okay, next slide. So then the next steps when we're talking about thinking outside the box, here is Jarek after high school. And when we had our first meeting, I've been his advocate for this the whole time. When we had our meeting with DBR and they were doing the job interest inventory, they kept asking him what he cared about, what he was interested in. He just kind of stuck with fishing. And I'll always remember the DBR coach going, well, we can't make a career out of fishing. And again, back to these parents who never take no as an answer, his mother said, why not? Why can't we make fishing a career objective? And so they signed him up with a career objective to keep on fishing. He was able to do work studies and job shadowing with people in different areas. I mean, he worked in a sporting goods store doing a job shadowing. And eventually he did get a paid position with the Pueblo State Fish Hatchery. And that was all through the process of DVR. Next slide. So not only is this only just about fishing or taking something that he enjoyed and making it go through, but all of these goals with fishing in mind led him to life skills, really cross-referencing those skills. Budgeting, purchasing, and restoring is on this slide here. When Jarek got his first check as a paid employee, full minimum wage paid employee, he set a goal in mind to buy himself a boat. So that took researching boats, finding them, shop and price comparison. And the question in the chat box is, what is DVR? And that's a good question. It's Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And it helps a student get a paid employment or paid employment in the community. So Jarek researched boats, found a boat, did shop comparison, budgeted for the boat. And then when he got the boat, it needed some repairs. So that took skills such as identifying problems, figuring out and researching how to correct them, and then actually doing the labor and the work to restore the boat. So all of these skills so far have led to this point. Next slide. And finally, it's just such a great story when you think about transition. This is a real picture of Jarek on his first day of college at Pueblo Community College, and that there with him is his disability resource coach. And he is now at PCC looking to earn a degree in wildlife, Division of Wildlife degree. So all of this has moved forward to get him to have a proper place in the community. Next slide. And this all kind of ties back again. I know you've seen our 6 core outcomes quite a few times, but it's really important to keep in mind how this applies to someone like Jarek. And I know Casey will be presenting another side of a story of a student who has gone through this successfully. So the first one is knowing what is important. List interest in your IEP, but find a way to build a life that you love. And that's something that can happen for all of our students. Build a community who understands, join groups, lead others in your passion. If there isn't a group or there isn't others, then create it. It's all something that can be done. Use your post-secondary options like Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Do things like job studies or internships, volunteer activities, even, there's day programs and art programs and things like that students can join. Develop competency. So always seek to build those skills. So we talked about Jarek and fishing, but not only that, he also learned to budget and plan and prepare and restore. So all of that came from developing that competency. And then of course, get paid doing it. And then learning to advocate for yourself, doing things like I showed the picture with him with the Pueblo Community College disability resource person. Just learn to advocate. Who do you reach out to? And as we talked in the beginning with the mountain you're climbing, all of those people helped you get to where you're going, and they can continue to help you going forward. Next slide. All right, I'll turn it over to the rest of the team. Thank you.
Hi, I am Courtney Callis, and I am a transition specialist at Denver Public Schools. I have worked in Denver Public Schools for 16 years, and I'm going to talk to you about transition assessment, how that relates to well-matched services, and how the 6 core outcomes can be can actually become a reality for all youth by having good transition assessment data. So next slide. Transition, I want to give you some background knowledge because transition assessment could feel pretty stale, right? It's like, ooh, assessment. But it's not. It's actually the key to a lot of things. And just like the transition process in IEPs, in Colorado, a transition assessment should start no later than age 15 or by the end of their 9th grade year. And similar to what Gail had mentioned, just like the transition process, it should be coordinated. And what Rhonda illustrated, it should be an ongoing yearly process of determining the young adult's future for, vision for their future and identifying skills and knowledge that they'll need to start to acquire skills to reach their goals for after high school. Next slide. And so continuing to build background knowledge for transition assessment, like I said, it is an ongoing process. And it should include lots of different things. It should be varied. There should be youth self-report information, and that should be trusted. Their perspective is important. And then it should also be, their perspective should be supplemented with a family and professional perspective through reported information from them. And that can foster discussion. If the youth feels that something is one way and the family and professionals see it a different way, that's a great discussion to have about, what's going on here? What's the discrepancy, or where are we coming together? Transition assessments can look like observations. They can be structured, right? Checklists, right? Or they can be anecdotal. Seeing them in different experiences. And as Rhonda talked about at the end of her section, joining things is really important. And transition assessment doesn't just have to be checklists. It doesn't just have to be structured observations. It can be a youth's reflection on new and past experiences based on things that they've joined, or newly learned information about different areas of transition based on things that they've done. That is really rich information that can inform what should happen next, or what should not happen next, right? As well as guided reflections looking at their assessment. Transition assessment doesn't just have to be thought of as assessment. It can also be a service and an activity in the transition process when we're really partnering with youth to reflect on the information that they got from their assessments, and ask them, like, well, what does this say about you? And what does this mean for your goals for the future? It can be dynamic, and it should be dynamic. Next slide. So thinking about transition assessment, it's not just like everything, right? You can narrow it down into 4 different areas: career and employment, post-high school education and training, independent living, and self-determination skills. And as you notice, they align with different post-high school goal areas, but they also are very aligned with the areas of service for the 6 core outcomes. And so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I really want to talk about also how with these 6 core outcomes, the big unifier is employment, right? We are an employment first state. And so next slide, transition assessment can really support with that huge unifying outcome, right? And transition assessment can inform work-based learning so that competitive integrative employment is a reality for a lot more of the youth that we work with, the teens that are our children. And because information from transition assessment is the key to well-matched work-based learning experiences, people should not just be going and putting clothes on hangers or wiping down tables, or whatever, right? They should be using assessment data, using their interests, right? Like Jarek, right? Fishing. Why could fishing not be a career, right? So if youth indicate an interest area, they should be exploring it and learning skills for it with relevant work-based learning that's community-based, either through Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, right? Medicaid waiver services, the schools, all of these things. And then also too, not everything can be totally interest-based. And so that's okay too, because if youth have areas of work readiness or self-determination skill development that's been indicated through transition assessment, work-based learning should be provided to scaffold and support and in supported environments to learn and practice those skills. It can be a way for them to learn things about themselves and just, those soft skills like interpersonal communication, organization, time management, as well. And transition assessment is the way to match them to those experiences that will help them learn. Next slide. So like I mentioned before, the areas of transition assessment are very nicely connected to the 6 core outcomes that Colorado state partners have determined would be very helpful for every youth to have success in. And this ongoing information from varied transition assessment is really going to help that. You can see that the transition assessment in career and employment really would support that expectation of competitive integrated employment. Transition assessment in post-high school education and training is really going to help with that outcome of post-secondary options. Transition assessment in independent living, well, maybe not everyone will get it, I hope that they do, right? Even students who have like more mild mod disabilities, you know, they could get assessment in this area so that we can really figure out their and build their skills to safely navigate community services and to access them, and also to understand disability and health management. Okay, and then the area of transition assessment in self-determination really supports the core outcomes of building self-determination and leadership skills, and really informs as well developing the competence in computer and digital literacy. Next slide.
Hey, Courtney, I'm just gonna jump in real quick. Our Spanish interpreters are saying we're going a little fast in words, so if you just slow down just a little bit.
Yes, I noticed our time, and so I was like, I can rock this, but I will pace myself. So let's take a pause. So I just talked about how transition assessment areas really align with 6 core outcomes. And there's a lot of different ways that they can do that. Okay, it's really, really based upon the results of the transition assessment. And so I'm going to give you an example of how transition assessment in the area of self-determination can really support with the core outcomes of building self-determination and leadership skills, as well as building competency in digital and computer skills. Okay, so when we assess self-determination, you might be like, I don't even know what that means. Well, there's research. There's 11 components to self-determination: choice making, decision making, problem solving, goal setting and attainment, self-observation skills, self-evaluation, self-reinforcement, internal locus of control, positive attributions of like self-efficacy, this I can mentality, right? And then positive attributions of outcome expectancy, like I can do things and it will be okay. Self-awareness and self-knowledge. We can assess all those different areas for youth and then use what we get, the information that we get, to help them build self-determination and leadership skills through services and activities like, let's say, participating in student government, participating in Special Olympics, especially their youth leadership programming, having youth-led IEP meetings or individual plan for employment meetings, or teaching and practicing choice-making skills, whether in the school or in a community-based environment, really depending on what we see, right, when we do that self-determination assessment. Next slide. When we do self-determination assessment, it can also help us develop activities and services for developing competence in computer and digital literacy, because digital literacy and computer literacy actually just really reduces isolation, really opens up choices for youth, opens up lots of different work options, right? And gives them pathways to be self-determined, to build the life that they love, as Rhonda put it. And ways that can happen is through assistive technology. But if we don't know, if a youth isn't good at making choices, isn't good at problem solving around things when stuff comes up, doesn't have self-awareness for the need of relevant assistive technology, we aren't able to provide that service of, teaching them the technology tools embedded in Google, Apple, Android, or Microsoft. If they don't have good self-evaluation skills or internal locus of control or self-awareness, we could teach them to practice internet safety for online dating and social media, and we would know to do that because of transition assessment. Same with practicing using mobile technology for different purposes, right? That all has to take decision-making skills. They have to evaluate how they're doing. You have to have self-knowledge of what works for them, right? And we can teach those things by teaching them how to use this technology. And that is it. I went a little bit fast, I realize, but I hope that you can really see that the information from transition assessment can help us inform activities and services to meet the 6 core outcomes. And it really does keep us accountable to being student-centered and collaborative outside school walls. So let's do a poll. This poll is really to have you indicate what are the services your teen has most accessed in the transition process so far. So let me read this aloud. In your teen's transition process, rate the kind of transition activities and services they have participated in the most that were facilitated by their school and or community agencies. 1, my child is not yet a teenager. My teen has not yet participated in any transition activities and services. That's an answer option. My teen has participated the most in transition assessment activities. My teen has participated the most in work-based learning activities like career exploration, school businesses, entrepreneurship, and paid and unpaid internships. My teen has participated the most in leadership and self-advocacy activities. My teen has participated the most in higher education exploration activities. And my teen has participated the most in community recreation activities. Or lastly, my teen has participated the most in community navigation activities, learning to ride the bus, drive, use pedestrian routes, or ride shares to get around their community. So I'll give you time to answer that. And I also just want to give you a little insight that this poll is also used to give you an idea of all the different types of services that can happen, right? There's a lot. Okay, Gail, I know you're doing these polls, so let's see what our responses are. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of people whose teens aren't yet, they're not yet teenagers, so that's good. Now you know. We have people, the majority where people have not participated in any transition activities, and that needs to change. And it looks like higher education and community recreation are the highest category. Awesome. So that's really good feedback. And I'm going to hand it off to Casey and Bob, who are really going to talk about what does this look like when your teen is still connected to a school district?
Sounds good. Sequencing of services. We can go to the next slide. So really what sequencing of services is all about in a nutshell is getting school districts to partner more effectively, more efficiently with all of the agencies around them. So this format that the state has put forward this year in the collaboration with all those agencies that Jennifer talked about gives a district support. My name's Bob Barrows, and I'm a special ed consultant working in Mesa County. And I've wondered about a lot of these connections between district and agencies in many districts that I've worked in Colorado over the last 34 years. So this process has given us an opportunity to really have a structured dialogue with figuring out how do we support parents better. Some of the quick things that we saw in this district that we need to partner better on was simply getting students signed up for disability benefits. We were seeing a lot of high school age students that were qualifying for disability benefits that just were not getting signed up with the community center board. Parents were not really understanding what options were out there in this community. So the sequencing of services helps to clarify the communication for the whole community, really, between the district and agencies. So the biggest thing we're working on in Mesa County, and I know the other pilots are too, is any good ideas that we're coming up with that are going to support parents, how do we make them sustainable over time so that year in and year out, we're supporting families, parents, and students better. So we're going to pass it to Casey in just a second, but in a nutshell, it is really taking a look at where does the young adult want to be when they turn 21, when they want to be out on their own. How do we create that symbiotic path to that adult's place and support them as much as we can while we still have them in the school district? And so we're trying to figure those things out in Mesa County with all of our agencies. Next slide. And we're trying to figure out, some of the myths in the land is what services can be provided to which students at which ages, what can be provided for a student when he's still enrolled in high school, he or she. And so we're calibrating all of that within the agencies that we're working with so that we can not just have the school district be the only one that is providing transition services for our young adults. All these other agencies and vocational rehabilitation and our community center board, they all have agency providers that can share in providing transition services for our young adults. So it's not just the school district in isolation trying to make that path to adulthood come alive. So Casey, I'm going to pass it on to you because I know we're running out of time here. So if you're in a district that needs better communication, better collaboration between a district and agencies, sequencing of services is your answer. Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, and going with what Bob said, so you guys, my name's Casey Little Al, and I am the 18 to 21 teacher and transition coordinator for the Fort Lupton Kingsburg Consortium out in Weld County. So yeah, so basically what Bob was saying is that young adults need to play that active role, working as a team with parents and with teachers and with the community and all the agencies to look at what can be provided and looking at it as a win-win for students, parents, community agencies, and school districts, and bettering the future for all individuals and which ultimately betters our communities. Go ahead to the next slide, and I'm sorry to rush. So that ongoing community structure. So like Bob said, looking at what's happening in the schools and making sure that it's developed, that road to the goal continues and that there's no gap in service or support so that students' last day mirrors the first day with ongoing adult programming. Go ahead. So this is who I wanted you to have a chance to meet. And I'm sorry, I've got to talk fast. We've got 4 minutes before you guys go on to closing questions. So this is Isabella. Isabella was staffed in early into special education and identified with intellectual disability and seizure disorder. Amazing young lady, very integrated in school. As you can see, she was a cheerleader at Fort Lupton High School and always been active and always dreaming. And her mom and dad are amazing dreamers with her and for her and support her. From the beginning, she wanted to work on a bus, be on the bus. She loves transportation. She loves riding school buses. That has transferred through the entire transition process of that her dream is to get training on the job and work as a bus assistant. She'd also like to live on her own with support, and with support looking at beyond her family and looking what adult services could provide her to be as independent as possible and living within her community. So she is in her second year at the 18 to 21 transition services in our district. She is currently working with the School to Work Alliance program. We're getting ready to start her with her paid work experience through SWAP and through task analysis and skill set development, being able to see what she can do independently and what she needs with support to be able to be that bus assistant. And then what that means going forward with DVR or possibly our community center board, which is Envision in Weld County. And so, sorry, I'm trying to slow it down because I know that I am booking it. So, but how and what she needs to be as independently to be as independent as possible and reach that dream of being a bus assistant. And does that mean that she will have enough support through DVR in the pre-employment and employment services, or will she need continuing support, maybe need to have a long-term job coach, maybe need to have continuous training? And so is that something then through the if DVR determines is not enough of what they can provide, will the Medicaid waiver, will that kick in with the community center board so she can have that long-term support? She can have the employment support and the community support because she's also a very social young lady and has that desire to be more active in her community and engaged. So my goal is by the time that she finishes services next May, that her last day will mirror what will continue for her. Okay, that leaves 1 minute, you guys. Thank you, thank you. I see that there's a bunch of questions going in there. And again, I apologize. I needed to ramble quick. We had a lot of information and wanted to try to give you guys a roadmap So you're not falling off that cliff, and to be able to give you the beginning of the support that you need.
No cliff and no gap.
No cliff, no gap. That's right.
No gap between their last day in the school district and their first day in the adult world. So that is what this is all about.
Mhm.
Yes. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was a lot of information. It was good stuff though. So if you guys have questions, please, 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 you can ask those questions through the Whova app, or you can email them directly. I'm like, they're happy to answer those questions for you. We're at the end of our session for today, but we are doing our closing remarks. So please join us for our last session. Is 15 minutes long, and we're doing our final giveaway. So thank you guys so much for presenting today. This is good information.
Thank you. Inspirational.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Take
Jennifer.
care.
Thank you.